I want you guys to all imagine with me that you're out wherever you're driving, because you guys are about from all over the place. So you're out wherever you're driving, going on vacation. Another family decides to tag along with you, so you rented a van. You're all traveling together. You go across the bridge, and the bridge goes out. Okay, everybody's all right, except for one gentleman. He's got his legs pretty screwed up. They're pretty crushed. And so you have this to deal with. You got a little bit of water. You got a little bit of food, a little trail mix left. We're going to stay away from the kids just for today. You got young adults. You got adults with you. So just put yourself there, and we're going to start going through a little bit of information on how you would handle yourself in this type of situation.
If I'm in a snowy condition, I'll build a snow cave. And what that is, we have so many pine trees in my area in the Midwest, in Cincinnati, Ohio. So many. And so if the snow is, 12 inches deep, I can make myself a little surrounding under a pine tree and have a nice cozy area and start a fire under there. It's a great place for me in a winter survival situation to be at. Now, let's say it's midsummer, it's hot out, a little rainy, build a shelter where you can find as much brush as possible. If you're in a circumstance where you don't know the names of shelters, it's super easy. You find your materials. The hardest part about survival and shelters and stuff is to sit there and find the materials, and that's what takes your time, and it'll take you a good 6 hours to build a good shelter. All right? And so you can make a shelter out of sticks and branches and find trees. You have to find your resources. You can find a natural shelter. And so you take your resources around you and you accumulate them all and go up against a tree, go up against a good tall rock, find an area where you can find some good coverage and build yourself a nice shelter, give yourself some coverage with those branches and put leaves and anything that you can do. Keep building that up to make it as dry as possible. So look for your resources around you and make yourself dry, comfortable, and cozy if you're out in the woods in a survival scenario.
All right, so that's a little bit about shelters. Obviously, just skimming the top, but it's very important to get out of the elements. It's really key. You want to make sure that you are not being overheated and you are not getting too cold. One thing that's going to help you from not getting too cold is, of course, fire, right? So, we're always looking about wildfires. I'm from a wildfire area where it's very, very dangerous sometimes to build a fire. So you want to make sure that you are not going to hurt yourself in the process, but fire is obviously key. So if we were in a desert area, Eric is going to tell us how to build a fire. What do we want to look for?
Okay. Well, yeah, it really depends on your region. I do friction fire. I will just say that we did have a hamburgered leg, and probably the first thing before I do is shelter is I'd stabilize my patient, and I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, he's dead, and we're burying him and building a shelter. So, anyways, okay, so desert. Honestly, the desert's actually a pretty easy place to start a fire. You've got lots of yucca, yarrow. That's one of the places that I actually usually don't even worry about bow drilling. If you just basically are looking, who's ever cracked open a weed before and seen that white pith on the inside? There's so many different options you can use. What I want you to look for is something about 2 feet long. It's about as straight as you can. And then sagebrush. If there's some yucca, there's some yarrow. Use that as your hearth board. Even if you don't know the floating hand technique, you know what? If you're just making good rotations, if you've done the bow drill, that's a really good thing to do as well. It really depends. But we were talking about the rule of 3. If I'm reduced to a friction fire and I have a car, jumper cables are going to solve that for me extremely quickly. I could do that. If you have an old school car, you use your cigarette lighter. That's kind of what I teach is minimalism. And beyond that, in your pack, I want 3 different ways to start a fire. So, we can do it friction fire, but your attention and your focus in this instance is going to have to be mostly on that patient, I would imagine. So I'm hoping that you already had something in your pack to start a fire with, because your attention is going to need to be on him. One of the last things you want to worry about is spending 5 hours trying to figure out the bow drill or trying to, be a MacGyver with the car. Survival is proactive. It's not reactive. So you're going to need to be able to be proactively react to any given situation. If you have that mentality, you'll be surprised at how few survival situations you'll be in. You can have some close calls, some good stories, but everybody's going to walk away. And fire, if you have, it's not just enough to have something to start the fire with, have something to keep the fire going. So have your little fuzz sticks, fire sticks, keep it going. Even in the desert, it can rain. Or you know what? The other thing is in the desert, sometimes there's not a lot of stuff to keep that fire going. It'll burn very quickly. So study up on your fires, like the reverse pyramid fire, so you're not throwing wood on there every 20 minutes. So again, variables, but with the desert, I will say your resources are very limited, and you don't want to expend a ton of calories gathering wood. So be efficient with the wood that you have. And that's probably excessive answer, but there you go.
All right, we're going to stay on the fire a little bit just because we're not always in a desert situation. Lots of us are from East Texas or very forested areas where we have rain that comes down. Rain can create this huge problem when it comes to not only starting a fire, but keeping it going. So really, we want to know, how do we start a fire when we just got the rain down? How do you make that happen? So Blake, go ahead and enlighten us.
So yeah, if I'm in the Midwest, which I am, and it's raining, it's pouring, and you know, I don't have a big bug out bag, but what I always carry, unless you're flying to Texas and you learn the hard way that you cannot take a lighter with you on a plane, I always carry a lighter with me, a big orange lighter, because the reason why you want an orange lighter, in case you drop it out in the woods, that orange shows real well. Now they have camo lighters, I would avoid those, because if you drop them, you're screwed. But I either carry a good lighter with me, or I'll have some flint and steel. I have a little Bear Grylls. I know it's frowned upon, but Bear Grylls Gerber flint and steel rod's about that big. I love having that on me. And flint and steel works really great in the rain. You drop it in the water, you're going fishing, it falls in the lake, you drop it in to get it, it can still strike. And so if it's raining out, you really want to have flint and steel. Now, with a fire starter that is gas operated, like a lighter, if it gets wet, it just varies on the circumstance of how wet it gets, if that will still ignite. And so really, if you're out in the woods, if you're a hunter like me, I always have a bug out bag, or I have flint and steel in my pocket. So when I go out there, I go stalking a deer, and let's say I get lost in the woods, have no cell phone service, I'm just way out there, I can start myself a nifty fire if it's raining out with my flint and steel. Now, what resources do I need? In the Midwest, again, there's a lot of pine. Pine burns really well, really easily, wet or not. The sap within pine, especially in the hard core and the hard center of it, known as fatwood, burns really well in the wet conditions. It burns just as well as, you know, if let's say you had oak, you took some oak, you make some wood shavings, some feather sticks, and that was dry oak, okay? If I had dry oak or wet pine, I would choose the wet pine before I chose the oak. And so pine works really great. If you have pine, look for cedar. Cedar also burns real well. So you're in a survival scenario, you find these trees and you get your feather stick out, get your knife out, and create some feather sticks, get some wood shavings, and take your flint and steel, start a fire. Now, bow drills are the most simple friction fires possible. And if it's wet out, a bow drill is going to be real tough. But if you keep doing that, it'll get that liquid out. But it just takes a while. Really lots of patience, and I'm no Eric when it comes to bow drills, and I've started a bow drill about 5 times, but it's one of the hardest things, in my opinion, in a wet condition. But I've done it, and so, but you really want to have flint and steel, and so, or you got to do a bow drill. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the elephant in the room is our poor friend who's all crushed and injured. So we need to get this guy stabilized, and for that we have Dr. Joe Alton here. So why don't you let us know what you do for this gentleman?
Well, if you've got somebody whose legs look like hamburger, the end result's going to depend on the quality of the meat. Okay, and so what you need to do is see what is alive and what is living tissue and what is tissue that's not alive. For muscle, if you pinch it with a tweezer or other instrument, you'll get it to twitch a little bit or shrink back a little bit. If it's live tissue, and it won't do anything if it's not live tissue. So what you need to do, if the wound is bad enough, is you have to determine how salvageable, let's say, the limb might be, and whether it's something that can be dealt with simply by placing a bandage, or whether you have a bone that's shattered and is maybe beyond help, or at least for the time being. For if there is an evacuation possible, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to stabilize that limb as much as you possibly can with a good splint. And even a shattered bone might still be something that you could save the actual limb with if you can get that person out. If you are, the interesting thing is that I write as if that's never going to happen, that you are never going to have somebody evacuate you, that you are now the end of the road, whether that person recovers or whether that person doesn't. And so in that case, then you may have to make the decision as to whether that limb stays or whether that limb goes. And what you do in that case is going to depend on, as I said, the amount of live tissue. When you decide to take a limb, then what you need to do is you need to remove more bone than you think you ordinarily would have to, because you need to get to a certain amount, a certain level that did not really receive trauma. And the same thing with skin, the same thing with muscle. You always leave more skin and more muscle than you leave bones, because you need a flap. And this is something that is a terrible decision that to have to make as a medic, but it is something that you have to really think about. People will not think about the tough decisions that you have to make as the medic for a survival group, for medic for a community that is off the grid, that is in an austere setting. But these are the kinds of decisions that you would have to make. That's a tough one, right? And if in the Civil War, you have to realize you're going to be thrown back in if you really wind up losing access to modern medicine, you're essentially thrown back to the 19th century. And we know a little bit more about antiseptics and keeping a wound clean than we did back then, but we still are going to have to face hard realities regarding the survival of patients like that, people that are gut shot, people that have chest wounds, people that have to have had amputations because of a shattered limb. You can expect Civil War era statistics with regards to survival. 72% death rate with chest wounds, 68% death rate with abdominal wounds, and 25 to 50% from successful amputations. That's the kind of life that you would have to, the kind of decisions that you would have to make as the medic in a true survival setting.
Yeah, that's a scary reality right there. That's one we talk about a lot on the podcast, and it's like, okay, we got real decisions to make here. So you talked about the quality of the meat, and one of the things I really believe in is your fitness level before you even go into this situation. So as a martial artist and an athlete, it's something I preach about pretty heavily. And Eric, I got this question for you. Why would it be so darn important to be physically ready before you ever get there?
Well, it kind of touches back on what I said with survival. I mean, it's really encouraging that everybody's here learning, because that's a proactive thing. Physical fitness is a proactive activity, and probably the most important thing, one of the most important things in survival. You can do a lot of the skills only if you actually have the physical ability to do them. It is not something, one of the proverbial things I hear all the time is like, if I got in that situation, yeah, I could do that. How do you know that? You've never done it before. Like, oh, I could bow drill if I really had to. Really? Have you tried it? It is physical exertion. I mean, like there's a reason, like our ancestors, they were all super fit. Why? Because they lived. Living is exertion. So, you need to, get kind of adjust your diet. The other thing is that, being physically fit isn't just going to the gym. It's adjusting your diet. It's kind of getting back to more a natural state of eating, because I'll tell you, when your other foods are not available and you're eating just tons of carbs and things that are processed, it's going to be a shock to your system. And so just by default, being physically fit through also your eating, most people don't understand, as soon as you change your diet all the way, you can become extremely ill. So for me, I try to eat as close to how I would eat in a survival situation, by doing a lot of foraging, by hunting my own game, by when I have to make that transition into survival mode, my body is actually not going to be shocked by it. My body's already prone to it. That just means my variables of actually surviving go way up. So it's not something I believe that people can just keep on putting on the back burner. If you need to be more fit, become more fit. If you need to adjust your eating, adjust your eating. Make sure that your body can handle survival. Because I would tell you, some people actually go right into shock. I remember I lived a few years in Argentina, and just the change in that first week of living there, my body was rejecting everything because it was a completely new way of eating for me. So just keep that in mind, that it's beyond going to the gym. Physical fitness is an all-around thing that you're going to have to encompass. Think about what you would have to eat, what you have as far as food storage, what you have as far as foraging. Start experimenting so it's not a shock.
Perfect. Just took the words out of my mouth, honestly. I love it. So another aspect that I explore a lot is survival spirit. So we've got, a lot of whining going on nowadays, a lot of crying going on nowadays, and that's not really going to cut it when you're out in a survival situation. You have to learn how to dig deep. So here to talk about that, we're going to give this one to Bob.
All right. Well, I feel particularly qualified to answer questions that have to do with survival spirit. A lot of the training that I underwent, especially as a younger man, was doing horseback treks through the Davis Mountains. And I had a program where I would do 5- and 6-day treks for 2-month stints. My job was to bring people in from Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and beyond. People that had lived most of their lives going from house to house, environment to environment, all air-conditioned. Take them into the Davis Mountains, show them some horsemanship, and keep them alive throughout the Davis Mountains for 6 days at a time. To look at them physically, mentally, and know with each of those people about what day they were going to crack. And it was usually just a matter of time. When it comes down to attitude, when you're out there in the environment, when you're feeling these stresses that you've never felt before, even when you have everything taken care of, you've got your water, you've got your food, you've got your shelter, you're still getting stressed out. Things are still happening with your body, and that's going to have and take a toll upon your mind. So being able to stop, center yourself, having the right attitude is incredibly important. And if you have somebody on your team, things are going wrong and they start to panic, they start to freak out, you can create a survival situation real quick where it could have been just a simple little camp out and everybody's happy. So having the right people and being able to shut people down and being able to get them in the right spot, it is incredibly important to have the right mindset when you go into stuff. Usually having a clear mind is the way to do it. Now in survival, a lot of times, everybody feels like they need to get up and start moving. They got to start doing something. As soon as something happens, everybody goes into motion, and one of the most important things you can do is just stop. Center your mind, open your ears, listen and look. All right? Stop. Don't start sharpening sticks immediately and going out there and walking through the forest, doing 20 miles. Look around you. The food is there. The animals are already there. You're there. Figure out what's going on. Because in my neck of the woods, I guarantee you, most of the folks I take out in the forest, they would starve within 4 or 5 days. When most of them, if they just slip into the river, they could have 300 pounds worth of clams within 30 minutes. They would starve to death with literally all the food that they could eat in an entire lifetime, less than a few paces away. And when you just stop and you watch where the creatures are going and you watch what everything else is doing, you'll be doing all right. But in survival, guys, you stay busy, you move around. A lot of times, the attitude stuff never even hits you. You've got too many things to do, too many concerns to do. The world will not flood in until everything's over, and that's a good thing. In long-term survival, I would do this for 10, 11, 12 weeks out on the trail. The last thing I want to say is about week 6, and everybody's different, week 6, I just needed a hug. I would start to break about week 6 every year. And I would need to go out and just hang out and talk to my horse and get a hug from somebody. So everybody has their breaking point. We all have our needs, water, shelter, food, friendship, and being able to make sure that everybody's okay. Take a moment and get yourself right, depending on the situation.
Yeah. Alrighty, so now we're talking about, our weather. Weather obviously is going to affect your survival situation in a huge way. And James has some great information on how to tell when the weather's going to change on you, how to read those clouds, tell what's going on. So why don't you help us out there, James?
when you're in the outdoors, you always have to watch the weather. It can come in on you suddenly, and it can really mess up your plans for a good day. If you have a good shelter, which we've already decided we have, you have to keep a watch on the clouds. The clouds can tell you what is going to be happening the next day, later that day, by watching them. Now, as these clouds build up, you're going to notice that they're moving. And if they're moving fast, that means the weather that's coming is going to be short. And as they get darker and darker and darker, if they continue to move fast, that means that that storm that's coming in is not going to last very long. So if you need water, you better get your catch basins all set up, and set up quickly, because it's not going to last long, and what water you're going to catch is not going to be that much. So put out as much as you can to catch that water, whether it be tarps, a shirt with a pot of some kind underneath it, and depending on the cloud size, how much water is going to come down. Well, it's going to be a whole bunch at once, or just a little bit and move on. My granddaughter, she's 7 years old, and I began teaching her about cloud formations and the darkness of the clouds and how fast they move. And she can tell you now that she's 7, whether it's going to rain or not. So study your clouds, keep a watch on them, and if you see a dark cloud and it's raining maybe 10 miles away or so, you have to be aware that if you're in a low-lying area, that you could be possibly facing a flash flood or a flood where you are at, depending on which way the water is draining in your area. So when you pick your place for shelter, make sure it's not in a low-lying area. Your cloud structure, for the first 30,000 feet, you've got your little puffball clouds, your cumulus clouds. From there on up, you get into your cumulus, stratus, altostratus, cumulostratus, and the higher they go, when you get up into your altostratus and higher, chances are starting to get a little bit better for rain. When they get into the big cumulus clouds, cumulonimbus clouds, that's where you start getting your rain clouds. And when they start building up real high to where your major airlines flying through them and above them, then you are going to get some rain. But the darker they get, when they start dropping that rain, you are going to be in trouble.
Thanks, James, a little bit about our weather there. Okay, so weather changing, we're going to be exposed to elements. So I want to pose this question to you, Dr. Alton. What are signs of like hypothermia and also hyperthermia, depending on we're hot, we're cold, right? Different climates all across the region. So let's talk a little bit about those things.
Absolutely. Hyperthermia, in its mild to moderate state, we refer to as heat exhaustion. You may have heard that term. When it's severe, we call it heat stroke. Now, in someone who has heat exhaustion, this person may feel faint. That person will have a tendency to have muscle cramps. They'll be profusely sweating in most cases, and they will feel confused. They'll have a headache, and they may be somewhat dizzy. Now, once you reach a certain point in your body core that you've gone above a certain level, and that level is actually pretty consistent in humans, it's about 105 degrees. Once your body core is at about 105 degrees, you go into heat stroke. And not only is that person, of course, more mentally altered, many times not conscious at all, but also that person can be identified by bright red skin and the lack of sweating. The skin might be still a little wet because there's a cascade. He went from heat exhaustion to heat stroke. But at 105 degrees, your body loses the ability to sweat as a mechanism for losing heat. And so that's how you can tell that. Of course, what do you want to do with that person? You want to get them out of the heat, right? You want to drench them. In the Army now, they have a couple of methods called the taco method and the burrito method, in which they take a wet sheet with ice maybe and soaking wet sheet. They wrap you up. If you have guys holding the sheet up here and here, you got a taco. And if you wrap the person completely up, you've got a burrito. And that's a way that you can deal with somebody who is in heat stroke to cool them down. Of course, if you can drench them in water and watch them carefully, then you can do that. Now, if you don't have any of those things, all you have, let's say, is some shake and break ice packs, then I want you to put those ice packs where the blood vessels run close to the skin so we can more efficiently transport the coolness to the body core. And those areas are the neck, the armpit, and the groin area. So those are the things I want you to do. Those packs should be moist. Now, for hypothermia, it's sort of funny how for a species that's so resilient in the face of adversity as we are, it is pretty amazing that we have a pretty narrow range in which our body core can be. From 105 degrees, you're in big trouble. 95 degrees or lower, you can be in big trouble too with hypothermia. And if that happens, what you find mostly is altered mental status. That person is confused. That person is maybe lethargic. They're not answering. They're apathetic. I'll go up to a person like that and I'll say, "Hey, what's going on?" And they'll say, "Oh, I'm dying of the cold. I think I'll take a nap now." And sure enough, they do. And they die as a result of organ failure and, of course, the lack and the slowness of which their brain is functioning at a lower temperature. Now, for those guys, what you need to do is you need to warm them up. They have wet clothes on. You got to take those clothes off and cover them up with dry blankets. Maybe you're not the warm and fuzzy type, but you might even consider taking your clothes off and spooning with this person, get a little body heat to them in that way. Cover both of you with blankets. You know, it's something that you may not want to do, but the truth of the matter is that you're trying to save a life here. And of course, in people like this, you have to, everybody's seen and in the talk I'm giving right after this, I'm going to show you a picture of a St. Bernard with a cask of brandy around his neck in the Alps, saving a lost alpine mountaineer. Well, guess what the worst thing is to give people who are hypothermic is alcohol, because alcohol expands blood vessels, and those blood vessels that are expanded are a great way to lose heat from your body, something you don't want to do if you're dying of the cold, right? So that's something that you definitely don't want to do, is you do not want to give them alcohol. So these are some of the things that you want to do for both hyperthermia and then for hypo.
Those are two pretty serious conditions. We got to avoid those at all costs. Now, if you remember back to the beginning, I said we had some flats of water. We didn't have very many flats of water, right? We had a couple of 20-ounce bottles floating around, maybe some half-drinking ones in the back. So we are going to have to procure some more water. So, Eric, why don't you talk to us a little bit about how you're going to get that water, how we are going to make that water safe to drink.
Okay, so and we're still in the desert, right? Are we in the desert? Where are we at? Okay, we're in the desert. Fine. Okay, so honestly, this is where I'm like, those of you who went to my class, you gotta have some fire. You know, the only real way to make that water safe is to boil it. for 15 minutes. And if you're up higher, make sure if you're up at 7,000 feet, it's 18 minutes. Understand those things, okay? Because we are fighting against 3 different things. We have protozoa, we have bacteria, and we have viruses, okay? And so first of all, I'm going to go back because I always get reluctant to show people MacGyver skills outdoors, and then they think they can just depend on that. I want the rule of 3 to be observed with the water filters. Hopefully you already have some. First of all, in the desert, sometimes there's simply not going to be water. Hopefully you took some with you. I like to see 2 gallons per person in that car. Now, I guess it's not the case in this situation, so then you're going to need to look at, okay, where can I get water? So even when you find the water, so I was just out in Moab 2 weeks ago, and up in the top of the desert, up in the sandstone, you get these little depressions, okay? They're little wells, okay? They have water in them, but I will say they also have everything else living in them as well. So you're going to be competing for that water because they'd like to live there and you'd like to drink it and live. So the way we're going to be able to do that, hopefully, if anybody heard of like a live straw? Okay, those are excellent. Often when I'm going in the desert, even if I have purified water on my back, I don't want to drink that just yet. Sometimes I'll stretch myself, and when I see opportunistic places to actually fill my belly with liquid, I will go down and I will use that live straw, and that filters out down to 1 micron. Now, iodine tablets, those are great. I'm going to get, and then we'll get into the primitive stuff, but can't reiterate enough, please have a filter. Please have something. Now, there are instances, even if you have a filter, there's so much sediment, so much mud, and especially in the desert, you start pumping that filter, what happens? Clogs it immediately. There are some tricks. If you have a little piece of cordage or just the under piece of your shirt, wet that, take 2 basins, 1 here and 1 here, wet it, and then it will actually go in and climb out and go into the other one. So if you have a little bit of time, that way save your filter, because otherwise it's going to clog really fast with silt. So there's a couple things you can if you're in need of water really fast. Sometimes you just have to take a risk, but there's safer ways to take a risk to drink water. Okay, if you can't start a fire, there's a thing called the gypsy well. So if you do actually find a water body, you can dig a little hand well. It's close to 15, 20 feet away, and find that water table that filters out stuff as well. Now, just because you have a dry riverbed as well, sometimes we see a dry riverbed and we don't see any water. That doesn't mean water's not there. Water can actually be very close to the surface. It's then become an aquifer. Hand wells are really good. So the outside edges of those washes are great places to look for that. Now, if you see cottonwood trees, look at the grasses. Look at what's growing there. If they're getting water, plants that, if they're not growing that way, obviously they're still getting water. So those are good indicators as well. So now, the absolute most primitive way to boil out water, and if you don't have a basin, is you have to burn out a log. So again, fire comes in here. You take a little piece of coal, and then I like finding a little bit of a reed that's kind of like a straw, and you blow on it, and you control burn out a basin that will actually hold water. Then I like starting the fire and getting a bunch of rocks about this big. You can stick them deep into the fire, because obviously I can't put that basin onto the fire. It'll burn. But I still need to be able to boil it. So I take about 20 of those rocks, deep heat them, get them just hotter than heck. Grab each one, and I like to split it in half. So often people will see bamboo and they'll stick it down there. Sometimes it's hard to remove the rock. If you do it lengthwise and burn it out, you can actually do quite a few gallons at once and stick rocks lining in there. Stick that hot rock, put it in there. You'll be surprised how fast you'll get that water burning. Once the rock is cooled, take that, put it back in, you switch. Guess what? You just boiled water. Again, that is like the last option for me, but you know what? Sometimes all you have is the last option. You can do other things like condensation traps. If you find the right kind of tree that isn't toxic, you can actually grab, your little hairband, put it over as many leaves as possible, close it off. Trees perspirate water into the air. And so if you get a bunch of those, there's just so many ways that you can get water. Solar stills. Everybody goes down to the proverbial question of like, okay, do I drink my urine? Please don't. If you're going to do that, honestly, it does more damage than good. And if you're going to actually use that liquid, figure out how to use a solar still and distill that water, then drink it. You'll lose a little bit, but honestly, your body's going to be a lot healthier if you do that. So there's never really one answer. Variables, variables, variables. Have 12 different options for one solution. Then you have all these different conduits. You're going to be able to get there, find something that works. That's why if you only have one method and one solution, well, either pray really hard that's going to work, or I just like having you know what, that one failed, I'm going to do this one. That one failed, I'm going to do this one. Okay, these 3 worked, but that one was more efficient. I hope that makes sense. Just knowledge literally empowers you.
So true. Okay, so say we're out there and we decide, well, it's worth the risk. We need the water. We're going to try this really primitive method. How are we going to know when it wasn't good, Dr. Althid?
You know, pretty damn soon. And I probably don't have to explain exactly how. Well, you know, there are dozens of different bacteria that can, and even viruses that like to live in water, and parasites actually need water. So you've got all sorts of stuff. Matter of fact, not only that, there are mosquitoes that need water, and they like stagnant pools to lay their eggs. So there are just about the entire range of infectious diseases that you can wind up dealing with as a result of having bad water. So, of course, there are different ways to purify your water. You've got to deal with that. As I will say that, in my opinion, the most unnecessary deaths that will occur in a true survival setting will simply be because of diarrheal disease causing dehydration due to bad water. So boiling your water and get it to a good rolling boil only has to be like that for a short period of time. Add, by the way, 1 minute of boil for every 1,000 feet of elevation. Iodine, 16 drops of tincture of iodine to water, 12 to 16 drops of bleach per gallon of water, or get a clear container, put that in direct sunlight for a good 8 hours, and you'll have UV sterilization of the water. So those are some ways that you can get the water to be clean. You need that water to be disinfected to the point that you can drink it. Now, if a stream, a beautiful mountain stream in a national park, looks clear, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have all sorts of bugs in it. And as a matter of fact, I hike the Smoky Mountains National Park regularly, and there are some beautiful streams there. Water's crystal clear. It is loaded with Giardia, a parasite that causes a terrible diarrheal disease, gives you explosive diarrhea, and that's why you absolutely can never just. I see people on Naked and Afraid. I'm afraid you're never going to see me naked. And I see these guys drinking water. Oh, this water is fine. Well, the water isn't always fine. It may be filtered, and it might look clear, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have organisms in it. So it's important for everyone to realize that if you can provide clean water to your people, you're going to be doing the best you can to increase their chances of survival. If you don't care about that, then you are going to have infectious disease running rampant among your people.
So I just want to back it up. Like, what do we do if we get we have the negative, right? Yeah.
Well, you go to this talk that's right after this one. Because I'm going to talk about antibiotics. I'm not only a medical doctor, but I also am an aquaculturist. I grow tilapia in ponds. I used to also breed tropical fish and things like that. And we talk about antibiotics. That we used antibiotics for our fish that had fin rot and other bacterial disease. Of course, as a doctor, I treated people with antibiotics when they needed antibiotics. And we actually found antibiotics that are without a prescription, that you can get 1,000 of them at a time if you want to, and you'll need those to deal with things like cholera, with things like typhoid fever, a lot of the pandemic and epidemic diseases that occur as a result of bad water. And so to go